My father looked at my stomach and called me a liability. He wanted me gone to save his reputation, never asking about the baby. I did not cry. I simply left a box proving his fraud on the table and walked out into the snow. 7 years later, I have not returned for forgiveness. I came back to buy his debt and the lawyer he trusts most. My name is Natalie Sanders, though for the first 21 years of my life, I carried the weight of a different surname. I was a Caldwell, a daughter of the illustrious Pittsburgh construction dynasty that built half the strip malls and office parks in Allegheny County. That name was supposed to be a shield, a golden ticket that opened doors before you even reached for the handle. But on that freezing Tuesday night in December, inside the dining room that smelled of roasted lamb and old money denial, I learned that a name is not a shield, it is a price tag. And my father had just decided that I was no longer worth the cost of doing business. The dining room was suffocatingly warm. My father, Raymond Caldwell, believed that high heating bills were a status symbol, a way to show the neighbors that Caldwell Ridge Contracting was immune to the fluctuating energy prices that worried the rest of Pennsylvania. The chandelier above us, a monstrosity of crystal and gold leaf that my mother had hated before she passed, cast a harsh, interrogating light over the dinner table. There were 12 of us seated, my aunts, my uncles, a few cousins who were already being groomed to take over project management roles. And me, I sat at the far end of the table, my hand resting instinctively on the slight curve of my stomach. I was 4 months pregnant. It was barely visible under my oversized wool sweater, but to my father, it was a neon sign flashing failure. The conversation had been stilted for an hour. The clinking of silver forks against fine china was too loud, punctuated by forced laughter whenever Uncle Marcus made a joke about the Steelers. Everyone knew what was coming. They had been briefed. I was the only one who had walked into the ambush blind, thinking this was just another mandatory family obligation. Raymond stood up. He did not tap his glass. He simply cleared his throat, a low, gravelly sound that instantly silenced the room. He was a large man, broad-shouldered from his youth in the framing crews, but softened now by 2 decades of sitting in leather chairs and drinking expensive scotch. He wore a navy suit, impeccable and sharp, the armor of a man who believed he controlled the world around him. He did not look at me. He looked at the centerpiece, a sprawling arrangement of winter holly and white roses. "We have always prided ourselves on reputation," Raymond began, his voice smooth, practiced. It was the voice he used when pitching to city councils or calming nervous investors. The Caldwell name means stability. It means honor. It means we build things that last. He paused, letting the words settle like cement. Then, his eyes snapped to me. There was no warmth in them, no fatherly concern. There was only the cold calculation of an auditor looking at a bad ledger entry. "However," he continued, his tone hardening, "we cannot build on a cracked foundation, Natalie. You have made choices that are incompatible with the values of this family. You have brought a situation into this house that I cannot, and will not, endorse." He gestured vaguely at my stomach, a motion of disgust, as if I were carrying a disease rather than his grandchild. "I have spoken to the board. I have spoken to the family." He lied. He was the board. He was the family. "We are in the middle of securing the contract for the new municipal stadium. It is a delicate time. We need projection of strength, of moral standing. Having an unwed, unemployed daughter parading a mistake around town, it is a liability." The word hung in the air. Liability. It was a business term, a debt, a risk, something to be minimized, written off, or liquidated. He wasn't talking about a scandal. He was talking about a balance sheet. "I have made arrangements," Raymond said, finally looking me in the eye. "You will leave tonight. I will not have this shame under my roof while I am trying to secure the future of this company. You are a liability to the family name, Natalie, and I cut liabilities." The room was silent. Aunt Linda studied her napkin intently. Uncle Marcus took a long, slow sip of his wine. No one spoke. No one defended me. No one asked if I had a place to go, or if I had money for a hotel, or who the father was. It didn't matter. In Raymond's world, the details of my struggle were irrelevant. Only the impact on his image mattered. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. I expected tears. I expected the hot flush of humiliation to burn my cheeks. I expected to beg, to plead, to promise I would hide away until the baby was born. But none of that happened. Instead, a glacial calm settled in my chest. It was cold and sharp, like the wind howling outside the frosted windows. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the slight tremor in his hand holding the wine glass, not from age, but from stress. I saw the way his collar seemed a fraction too tight. I saw a man who was terrified, not of my pregnancy, but of something else, something much bigger. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made my cousin flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. "So," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "How fast do you want me gone?" Raymond blinked. He had expected hysteria. He had prepared for a scene he could dismiss as female emotional instability. He was not prepared for compliance. "Immediately," he said, regaining his composure. "Tonight?" "Fine," I said. I reached down to the floor where my bag sat, but I didn't pick up my purse. Instead, I lifted a small, rectangular box. It was wrapped in elegant silver paper, tied with a navy blue ribbon, the company colors. It looked like a Christmas gift, or perhaps a peace offering. I walked the length of the table. The sound of my boots on the wood was rhythmic, deliberate. Every eye followed me. They probably thought it was a parting gift, a desperate attempt to buy his love back, or maybe a framed ultrasound picture to guilt him. I stopped right in front of him. He stayed seated, looking up at me with a mix of wariness and arrogance. "I have something for you, too," I said softly. I placed the box on the table, right next to his half-eaten roast beef. I set it down gently, with care. "What is this?" he asked, his lip curling in a sneer. "A plea for mercy?" "Open it after I leave," I said. He didn't know what was inside, but I did. Inside that box were 3 years of past due notices from equipment leasing companies. There were copies of 3 distinct loan agreements for heavy machinery, excavators and bulldozers, that I knew for a fact the company did not own. And most damning of all, there were the personal guarantee documents that listed Natalie Caldwell as the guarantor, documents that bore a signature that spelled my name, but was written with the heavy, looping slant of my father's hand. I had found them by accident 2 days ago, buried in a mislabeled file in his home office when I was looking for my birth certificate. He had used my identity. He had used my clean credit score, which I had built meticulously since I was 18, to secure loans for his failing projects. He had leveraged my future to patch the holes in his sinking ship. He wasn't kicking me out because I was pregnant. That was just the excuse. He was kicking me out because if I stayed, if I applied for an apartment or a car loan for the baby, I would see the credit alerts. I would find out. He needed me gone, distanced, and estranged so that when the default notices started hitting my name, he could claim I was irresponsible, that I had ruined my own finances. He was framing me for his own debt. Raymond looked at the box, then back at me. He laughed, a short dismissive bark of sound. He didn't pick it up. He nudged it away with his knuckle, as if it were a piece of trash. "Childish games," he muttered, loud enough for the table to hear. "Go on. Then, get out. And don't think you can come crawling back when reality hits you." That dismissal, that arrogance, that was his first mistake. If he had opened the box then, if he had seen that I knew, he might have tried to bargain. He might have tried to manipulate me into silence. But he was too proud to believe that his daughter, the liability, could ever be a threat. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I didn't say it with anger. I said it like I was closing a book. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer with its marble floors that were always too slippery, and to the heavy oak front door. I grabbed my coat from the rack, a thin wool trench coat that wouldn't be nearly enough for the storm outside. I picked up my small duffel bag, which I had packed 2 hours ago because I knew, deep down, that this family was no longer mine. I opened the door and the wind hit me instantly, biting through my sweater. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, burying the driveway, burying the manicured lawn, burying the lies of Caldwell Ridge. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I walked down the long driveway, the snow crunching under my boots. I didn't have a car. It was in the company name, and I had left the keys on the hall table. I would have to walk 2 miles to the bus stop on the main highway. I reached into my pocket and touched the old phone I had kept. I had factory reset it, erased all the family contacts, erased the photos of holidays and birthdays. I was starting from zero. Actually, I was starting from less than zero. I was starting with a stolen identity and a credit score that was about to be incinerated by the man who was supposed to protect me. I stopped at the end of the driveway, under the yellow glow of the street lamp. I looked back at the house. It glowed warmly in the night, a beacon of prosperity and family values. Inside, they were probably ordering dessert. Inside, Raymond was probably toasting to his decisive leadership. Relieved that he had cut the cancer out of his life, he thought he had discarded a liability. He didn't realize he had just created an adversary. I placed a hand on my stomach again. The baby kicked, a tiny flutter of life against my palm. "We are going to be okay," I whispered to the dark. But he is not. I turned away from the house and began to walk into the white void of the storm. I didn't know where I would sleep that night. I didn't know how I would afford the hospital bills. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not just walking away. I was gathering momentum. 7 years. That was the number that popped into my head. Though I didn't know why at the time. Maybe it was the statute of limitations on certain debts. Maybe it was just how long it takes for the cells in a human body to completely replace themselves, making you a whole new person. 7 years. That is long enough to learn the law. Long enough to learn how money moves in the shadows. Long enough to understand that debt is not just about money. It is about power. It is about who holds the paper and who holds the pen. My father had signed my name to his failures. He thought that was the end of the story. He thought I would fade into poverty and silence. Another sad statistic of a single mother who couldn't make it. He was wrong. I tightened my scarf against the wind and took another step. The snow was deep, making every movement an effort, but I pushed through. 7 years, enough time for a debt to turn from a burden into a scythe, to understand why I walked out of that house with dry eyes and a cold heart. You have to understand that the betrayal did not happen at the dinner table. The dinner was just the paperwork. The actual theft had happened 2 years before that night, in a room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive cigars. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 22. Fresh out of college with a degree in English that my father considered decorative at best. I was working part-time at a bookstore, trying to figure out who I was outside of the Caldwell shadow. Raymond called me into his office at the headquarters, a sprawling glass building that overlooked the very construction yard where he kept his fleet. He was in a benevolent mood that day. He sat behind his mahogany desk, the one that looked like the bow of a ship, and smiled at me with a warmth that felt genuine. I was young enough then to mistake his manipulation for affection. He told me he wanted to help me build a future. He said that a young woman needed a solid financial footprint and a resume that screamed competence. He offered me a title, corporate secretary. It sounded important. It sounded like he respected me. I would not have to come into the office every day, he assured me, but I would be an officer of the company on paper. It would look excellent for my credit history and my professional standing. I was flattered. I sat down in the leather guest chair, and he slid a stack of documents across the desk toward me. They were thick, dense with legal jargon, the edges perfectly aligned. Just standard operating agreements, he had said, waving a gold fountain pen in the air. Just formalities to add you to the authorized personnel list, so you can build that credit score. Trust me. Natalie, in 10 years, you will thank me when you go to buy your first house and the bank rolls out the red carpet. I trusted him. He was my father. He was the successful businessman, the pillar of the community. Why would I read the fine print when the man who taught me to ride a bike was telling me where to sign? I picked up the pen. It was heavy, cool to the touch. I signed my name. Once, twice, 10 times. I flipped through the pages, signing where the little yellow sticky notes indicated, never pausing to parse the language about joint and several liability, about personal guarantees, about unconditional repayment obligations. I did not know I was signing away my 20s. I did not know I was co-signing for 3 excavators, a fleet of heavy-duty pickup trucks, and a revolving line of credit that Raymond had already maxed out. I was not becoming an officer. I was becoming a shield. The reality did not hit me all at once. It crept in like black mold, slow and toxic. The first sign was a letter that arrived at my apartment 6 months later. It was addressed to me, but the return address was a heavy equipment leasing firm in Ohio. I opened it, expecting a mistake. It was a notice of default. It stated that the payment for a Caterpillar loader was 60 days past due, and that as the guarantor, I was liable for the immediate payment of $4,000 to bring the account current. I stared at the paper. $4,000. That was more than I had in my entire savings account. I drove straight to the office. I marched past the receptionist and threw the letter onto my father's desk. He didn't even look up from his blueprints. He just picked up the paper, glanced at it, and tossed it into a shredder. "It is just a clerical error," he said, his voice bored. "The accounting department is switching software. It sent automated letters to everyone on the registry. Ignore it." I wanted to believe him, so I did. I let him gaslight me because the alternative was admitting that my father was using me. But the letters kept coming, not to the office, but to me. Collection notices, warnings about accelerated debt. When I brought them up, he stopped being dismissive and started getting angry. He called me sensitive. He told me I was hysterical. He said I didn't understand how complex commercial finance worked and that I should stop meddling in men's business. He told me he handled millions of dollars a day and that I was panicking over paperwork that didn't mean anything. Then came the pregnancy. That changed the timeline. It stripped away the luxury of denial. When I found out I was expecting, the instinct to nest, to find safety, became overwhelming. My lease was ending, and my roommate was moving to Chicago. I needed a place of my own, a safe haven for me and the baby. I found a perfect little duplex on the east side of town. It was small, with peeling yellow paint, but it had a second bedroom that caught the morning sun. I had saved every penny from my bookstore job. I had the first month, the last month, and the security deposit in a cashier's check. I was ready. I filled out the application with a sense of pride. I handed it to the landlord, a kind older woman named Mrs. Higgins who smelled of lavender and baking soda. She told me she loved renting to young mothers. She told me the place was mine as long as the background check cleared. 2 days later, she called me. Her voice was ice cold. She told me she could not rent to someone with my financial character. I was confused. I told her I had the money. I told her she could call my boss at the bookstore. She interrupted me. She said my credit score was 420. I felt the blood drain from my face. 420 was not just bad. It was catastrophic. It was the score of someone who had declared bankruptcy or who had never paid a bill in their life. She listed the reasons: multiple charge-offs, 90-day delinquencies on commercial loans, a judgment filed in a county court I had never even visited. She hung up before I could explain. Not that I could explain. How do you explain that you are technically a millionaire in debt because your father needed a new crane? That night, I tried to check into a hotel. My credit card was declined. The issuer had slashed my limit to 0 without telling me. I sat in my car, a 5-year-old sedan that was the only thing I truly owned, parked in the back corner of a 24-hour grocery store parking lot. It was raining. I remember the sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof, a relentless, rhythmic tapping that felt like a countdown. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, but the steering wheel still pressed against my stomach. I was homeless. I was the daughter of the wealthiest contractor in the county, and I was sleeping in a Honda because no landlord would touch me. I cried then. I cried until my throat was raw. I cried for the baby who deserved better. I cried for the stupidity of the girl who had signed those papers. The next morning, I drove to the construction site where Ethan worked. Ethan Price, the father of my child. He was a project manager for my father, a rising star who knew how to cut costs and speed up schedules. We had been seeing each other in secret for a year. He was charming, ambitious, and he had told me he loved me. I found him near the trailer, wearing his hard hat and that bright orange vest that marked him as one of the crew. I pulled him aside. Behind a stack of plywood, I told him everything. I told him about the credit score, the debt, the car. I told him I needed help. I didn't ask for money. I asked for him to stand with me. I asked him to go to Raymond with me and demand that he fix this. Ethan looked at me, and then he looked toward the main office trailer where my father was holding a meeting. I saw the calculation happen behind his eyes. I saw him weigh me, a pregnant girlfriend with a ruined financial reputation, against his career, his salary, and the approval of Raymond Caldwell. He took a step back. He told me I was overreacting. He said Raymond was a genius businessman and that these things take time to resolve. He said he was up for a promotion next month. He said he couldn't rock the boat right now. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he wasn't looking at me as his partner. He was looking at me as an obstacle. He was already choosing the company over his own child. He told me to go home, to apologize to my dad for whatever I had done to upset him, and to wait it out. That was the moment my heart hardened. That was the moment the Natalie who signed papers without reading them died, and the Natalie who would eventually buy a debt collection agency was born. I found a room in a boarding house on the wrong side of the tracks. The landlord was a man with grease under his fingernails, who didn't ask for a social security number as long as I had cash. It was $300 a week. The walls were thin, and the hallway smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. But it had a lock on the door. I moved in with 2 suitcases, and then I went to work. Not at the bookstore. I quit that day. I went to work on Raymond. I still had my key card to the corporate office. My father hadn't revoked it because he was too arrogant to think I would use it. He thought I was cowering somewhere, ashamed of my failure. For 2 weeks, I went into the office at night. I told the security guard, old Mr. Henderson, that I was catching up on filing for my dad. He waved me through with a smile. I went to the file room. I didn't just look for my name. I looked for the pattern. I pulled every file related to the equipment leasing. I found the original contracts. I found the emails between my father and the bank officers. Emails where he explicitly directed them to send all correspondence regarding the guarantor to his private P.O. box. Not to my address. He had planned it. It wasn't negligence. It was architecture. I found a folder labeled with the project name of a failed strip mall development from 3 years ago. Inside, there were transfer documents moving the debt from the company ledger to the personal guarantee ledger. He had offloaded the toxic assets of the company onto my credit profile to clean up the company's balance sheet before a quarterly review with the investors. I took photos of everything. I made copies of the signature pages where my name looked shaky, where the pen pressure was too heavy, matching the way he signed his checks, not the way I signed mine. I found the envelopes that he had intercepted, unopened, stashed in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. I sat on the floor of that file room, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, and I organized the evidence. I created a timeline. I built a dossier. I realized then what had actually been stolen. It wasn't just money. Money can be made back. He had stolen my name. He had taken the identity of Natalie Caldwell and turned it into a trash bin for his financial mistakes. He had preserved his own reputation, the spotless, honorable name of Raymond Caldwell. By sacrificing mine, he remained the perfect businessman, the credit-worthy king, because I was the hidden sewer where he flushed his waste. I sat there, holding a copy of a loan for $50,000 for a bulldozer that had been repossessed a year ago. and I felt a strange sense of clarity. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just a girl who liked to read books and would do whatever Daddy said. He thought that by destroying my credit, he had trapped me, making me dependent on him forever because no one else would have me. He did not understand that when you take everything from a person, you also take away their fear. I had no credit to lose. I had no home to lose. I had no reputation to lose. I packed the copies into a small, elegant box, the kind you would put a birthday present in. I wrapped it in silver paper. I tied it with a navy blue ribbon. I knew the family dinner was coming up. I knew he would try to discard me then, to finalize the separation before the baby came and made things messy. He wanted a clean break. I decided I would give him something else. I would give him the truth, wrapped in a bow. I drove back to my cash-only room. I looked at the peeling wallpaper and promised the baby inside me that this was temporary. I promised her that her grandfather would pay for this room, and for every night I spent sleeping in that car. I wasn't going to the dinner to beg. I was going to the dinner to deliver a warning. He wanted me to be a liability? Fine, I would be the greatest liability he had ever encountered. The flashback ends there, in that small, smelly room, with me staring at the silver box on the wobbly nightstand, waiting for the sun to rise on the day that would end my life as his daughter and begin my life as his creditor. The hospital room was not the private suite with the view of the river that my mother had enjoyed when I was born. It was a shared room in the county hospital, with thin curtains separating me from a woman who was groaning in her sleep. The linoleum was scuffed, and the air smelled of antiseptic and industrial floor wax. But when the nurse placed Maya in my arms, none of that mattered. She was 6 pounds and 4 ounces of absolute innocence. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her tiny fists grasping at the air as if trying to catch a future that hadn't been written yet. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt the last remnants of the girl who had cried in the snow dissolve. That girl was gone. In her place was a mother. I brought her close to my face, inhaling the scent of her skin, which smelled like milk and new life. I whispered a promise to her, a vow that was more binding than any contract I had ever signed. I promised her that she would never know the coldness of a conditional love. I promised her that she would never be a line item on someone else's ledger. I promised her that she would not grow up in the shadow of the shame that Raymond Caldwell had tried to brand onto my skin. Her name was Maya Sanders. She carried my mother's maiden name, a name I had legally reclaimed the week before she was born. We were a new branch, grafted onto a different tree, but promises require capital. Love is free, but safety is expensive. 6 weeks later, I walked into the lobby of Stonebridge Ledger Works. It was not a glamorous Wall Street firm with glass elevators and espresso machines. It was a utilitarian brick building in the downtown district, wedged between a bail bondsman and a discount electronics store. Stonebridge was a back-end processing firm, a place where banks and credit unions outsourced their ugliest paperwork. The delinquencies, the charge-offs, the reconciliation of accounts that had gone dark. I wore a suit I had bought at a thrift store for $12. It was charcoal gray and slightly too big in the shoulders, but I had tailored it myself with a needle and thread late at night while Maya slept. I sat across from the hiring manager, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, who had a stain on her blouse and a desk buried under mountains of manila folders. She looked at my resume, which was sparse. I had left off the Caldwell family business. I had left off the gap year. I simply listed my degree and my typing speed. She asked me why I wanted to work in data entry for minimum wage. I looked her in the eye and told her the truth, or at least a version of it. I told her I was hungry for work. I told her I was accurate. I was fast, and I did not get bored. I told her I needed stability more than I needed excitement. She hired me on the spot. I started the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp. My job was the bottom of the food chain. I sat in a cubicle farm under humming fluorescent lights, processing loan files. My task was to verify data, check the name, check the balance, check the date of the last payment, and enter it into the system so the collections agents on the floor above could make their calls. Most people in my department listened to music or podcasts while they worked. Their eyes glazed over as they mindlessly typed numbers. I did not. I read. I read every single line. I read the terms and conditions. I read the clauses about acceleration, about cross-collateralization, about the rights of the lender and the rights of the borrower. I began to see patterns in the chaos. I saw how a missed payment of $50 could balloon into a debt of $500 through fees and interest compounding. I saw how a lack of knowledge was the most expensive thing a person could possess. I was learning a new language. It was the language of money. It was a cold, brutal language, stripped of emotion and mercy. But it had a syntax that could be mastered. Every day, I absorbed it. I learned the difference between a secured debt and an unsecured debt. I learned what a judgment lien was and how long it lasted in the state of Pennsylvania. I learned that most banks did not want to sue. They wanted to settle, because litigation cost them $200 an hour in legal fees. And they were cheap. I worked from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. I picked up Maya from the subsidized daycare center down the block, a place that smelled of bleach and graham crackers, and we took the bus home to our small apartment. I would feed her, bathe her, and read to her until she fell asleep. And then, my second shift began. I knew that a minimum wage salary would keep us alive, but it would never make us powerful. I needed a war chest. So, I found side work. I taught myself bookkeeping using library books and online tutorials. I found clients who couldn't afford a CPA, small landscape businesses, independent hairstylists, a guy who ran a food truck. I worked at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the room while the rest of the city slept. I organized their receipts. I balanced their checkbooks. I categorized their expenses. I charged them $20 an hour, then $25, then $30. I was meticulous. I treated their receipts like holy scripture. I saved every extra dollar. I didn't buy coffee. I didn't buy new clothes. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and pasta. Every spare cent went into a high-yield savings account that I nicknamed the Iron Bank. It was during my second year at Stonebridge that I met Elias Thorne. Elias was a relic of a bygone era. He was 70 years old, a senior analyst who worked in the corner office that smelled of peppermint and old paper. He was the guy the executives called when they had a complex file, a mess of assets and liabilities that no algorithm could untangle. One lunch break. I was sitting in the break room, reading a thick textbook on the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Elias walked in to refill his coffee mug. He stopped and looked at the book, then at me. He asked me if I was planning to become a lawyer. I told him no. I told him I just wanted to know the rules of the game. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He sat down opposite me and told me that the rules were simple. He said that debt was not about money. It was about emotion. He said that people paid not because they had to, but because they were afraid, or ashamed, or hopeful. He leaned in, his eyes sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses, and told me something I would never forget. He said that bad debt is not scary. What is scary is the person who knows how to use it. He became my unexpected mentor. Over the next 2 years, Elias taught me the things that were not in the textbooks. He taught me how to trace a shell company. He taught me how to find hidden assets by looking at divorce records and property tax filings. He taught me that a credit report is a biography, and if you know how to read it, you can see a person's soul, their impulses, their disciplines, their secrets. He also taught me that the system was flawed. He showed me how banks often lost the original paperwork for old debts, how they sold portfolios of loans for pennies on the dollar without checking if the balances were accurate. That was the key I had been looking for. I began to apply this knowledge to my own life. My credit report was still a disaster, a wreckage site left behind by my father's fraud. But now, I knew how to fight back. I did not scream or cry. I wrote letters. I sent certified letters to the credit bureaus. I disputed every single fraudulent account. I demanded validation of the debts. I asked for the original contracts with my wet signature. I knew, because I had stolen the evidence, that the leasing companies did not have my signature, They had my father's forgery, but I also knew they likely didn't even have that anymore. They had digitized files and lost the originals years ago, when they failed to provide the proof within the statutory 30-day window. I cited the law and demanded the removal of the trade lines. It was a slow, grinding war. It took 18 months. I received rejection letters. I received stall tactics, but I kept a log of every interaction. I recorded the dates, the names of the agents, the reference numbers. I was relentless. I was a machine of bureaucracy, one by one. The negative items began to vanish. The repossession fell off. The charge-offs disappeared. The judgments were vacated because I proved improper service of process. My father had accepted the summons at his office and never gave them to me, which was a violation of procedure. I watched my credit score climb. It went from the 400s to the 500s, then the 600s. The day it hit 720. I bought a bottle of cheap sparkling wine. I didn't drink it. I poured it down the sink as an offering to the gods of finance. I had cleaned my name. I was Natalie Sanders, and I was solvent. But I was not done. Survival was just the baseline. I wanted leverage. By the time Maya was 5 years old, I had been promoted 3 times at Stonebridge. I was now a senior portfolio manager. I understood the distressed debt market better than men who had been in it for 30 years. I knew that banks hated bad debt. It made their balance sheets look weak. They would do almost anything to get it off their books before the end of a fiscal quarter. I saw the opportunity. I saw the path back to Raymond Caldwell. I didn't want to just sue him. A lawsuit is public, messy, and he had better lawyers than I did. I wanted to own him. I wanted to hold the paper that controlled his life. I began to build the trap. I sat at my kitchen table late one night, the city silent outside my window. Maya was asleep in her room, surrounded by glow-in-the-dark stars we had stuck to the ceiling. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. I did not name it revenge. I did not name it justice. Those were emotional words, and emotion causes mistakes. I named the file Caldwell. It was not a hit list. It was a balance sheet. I began to populate the rows and columns. I listed every bank I knew my father did business with. I listed the suppliers he likely used for his lumber and concrete. I listed the equipment leasing firms. I started to track the local industry news. I saw that Caldwell Ridge Contracting was bidding on massive projects, stretching themselves thin. I saw that there were rumors of slow payments to subcontractors. I knew the signs. I had seen them 1,000 times at Stonebridge. A company that expands too fast, fueled by ego and cheap credit, is a house of cards waiting for a breeze. I was going to be the hurricane, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed more capital. The $25,000 I had saved in the Iron Bank was a good start, but it wasn't enough to buy commercial debt. I needed investors. I needed a legal entity. I needed a facade that looked like a legitimate investment fund. I looked at the spreadsheet. The cursor blinked in the cell next to estimated total liabilities. I typed in a number. It was a guess, but an educated one, $2 million. My father was drowning, and he didn't even know it yet. He was treading water, keeping his head up with the same arrogance that had made him kick a pregnant girl out into the snow. He thought the surface was calm. He didn't know that beneath the water, I was swimming toward him, and I had spent the last 5 years sharpening my teeth. I closed the laptop. I walked into Maya's room and kissed her forehead. She stirred and mumbled something about a pony. "Sleep tight, baby," I whispered. "Mommy is just checking the math." I went back to my room. But I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, visualizing the next steps. I would need to form an LLC. I would need to find a silent partner. I would need to quit my job at Stonebridge and take the leap. It was terrifying. It was risky. But then I remembered the look on Raymond's face when he called me a liability. I smiled in the dark. He was right. I was a liability. But he had forgotten the most important rule of accounting. Liabilities have to be paid, and I was coming to collect. The sign on the frosted glass door read Harrowvale Capital. It was a name I had chosen carefully. It sounded established, British, and vaguely intimidating, evoking images of ivy-covered brick and old money. In reality, Harrow Vale was a two-room suite on the fourth floor of a renovated warehouse in the Strip District, sitting above a wholesale flower market. I was 28 years old. The girl who had shivered in a parking lot was a distant memory, a ghost I had exorcised through 7 years of relentless work. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a specialist. My company bought debt. Specifically, I bought distressed corporate debt, the kind of ugly, messy financial obligations that banks were desperate to scrub from their ledgers. I was a bottom feeder, but I wore tailored silk blouses and sat in an ergonomic chair that cost $800. To the market, I was a liquidity provider. To the people whose paper I held, I was the reaper. My niche was specific. I did not touch consumer credit cards or student loans. There was no leverage there, only misery. I focused on small to mid-sized family businesses, construction firms, logistics companies, regional suppliers, places where the line between the CEO's ego and the company's bank account was blurred, places where reputation was used as collateral because the cash flow was bleeding out. I sat at my desk, flanked by 3 monitors. On the center screen was a dossier. It was the culmination of 3 months of forensic research, and it bore the name of my favorite subject, Caldwell Ridge Contracting. I did not hack into their servers. I did not bug their phones. I did not play dirty. I didn't have to. The beauty of the American financial system is that it leaves a trail of slime that anyone with a subscription to the county clerk's database can follow. I had built a network of professionals who operated strictly within the lines. I had a commercial lawyer, Sarah, who could spot a weak covenant in a loan agreement from 50 paces. I had a forensic accountant, David, who used to work for the IRS and could smell cooked books by looking at the ratio of accounts payable to revenue. And I had a freelance asset appraiser who spent his days driving past construction yards, noting which machines were moving and which ones were rusting in the weeds. Everything was legal. Everything was tight. I took a sip of black coffee and zoomed in on the document on the left screen. It was a court filing from a supplier in Ohio. A lumber distributor was suing Caldwell Ridge for $45,000 in unpaid invoices. The suit was 3 months old. "He is stretching the payables," I murmured to the empty room. It was a classic move. When cash is tight, you stop paying the vendors first. You figure they need your business, so they will wait. But $45,000 was a small amount for a company that claimed to be handling municipal stadium contracts. If Raymond was stiffing the lumber guy for $45,000, the rot was deep. I clicked to the next tab, a lien filing, then another. My father was building a house of cards. He was moving money from one project to cover the startup costs of another, robbing Peter to pay Paul, hoping that the big check from the city would clear before the whole thing collapsed. It was a Ponzi scheme of project management, but my target was not the suppliers. They were too small, too scattered. I needed the head of the snake. I needed the banks. I knew that Raymond banked locally. He liked being the big fish in the small pond. He liked walking into a branch where the manager knew his name and would waive the overdraft fees because he was Raymond Caldwell. I had identified 3 regional banks that held the bulk of his commercial paper: Iron City Trust, Allegheny Valley Bank, and Keystone Commercial. These banks were currently in a panic. The economy was tightening, interest rates were rising, and the federal regulators were cracking down on non-performing loans. A non-performing loan is a banker's nightmare. It sits on the books like a dead weight, ruining their capital ratios, forcing them to set aside cash reserves that they could otherwise be lending out to make profit. Bank managers have bonuses tied to the cleanliness of their portfolios. They want good loans. They hate bad loans. And right now, Raymond Caldwell was a very bad loan. I picked up my phone. It was time to go shopping. My first meeting was with the vice president of commercial lending at Iron City Trust. His name was Mr. Vance, a man with a receding hairline and a tie that was too wide for the current fashion. We met at a steakhouse downtown. Neutral ground. I did not tell him who my father was. To him, I was Ms. Sanders from Harrowvale Capital, a representative of a boutique investment fund looking to acquire high-risk assets. Mr. Vance was nervous. I could see it in the way he shredded his cocktail napkin. He had a quarterly review coming up in 2 weeks. We have done some analysis on the local construction sector, I said, cutting into my salad. We believe there is a correction coming. We are looking to pick up some exposure, specifically in the mid-market contracting space. Vance nodded, taking a large gulp of his iced tea. It is a tough market right now. Supply chain issues. Indeed, I said. My analysts have flagged a few portfolios that might be distressed. We are willing to take them off your hands. For a price. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of loan reference numbers. I had dug these up from the UCC filings, public records that show who has lent money to whom and what collateral was pledged. These are loans to Caldwell Ridge Contracting, I said, secured by heavy equipment and a revolving line of credit. According to my research, the borrower has missed 3 consecutive interest payments and is currently in a forbearance period. Vance froze. Information like that was supposed to be private, but forbearance agreements often trigger public notices if they involve changes to collateral. I had connected the dots. I cannot discuss specific client details, Vance said, his voice tight. Of course not, I replied smoothly. But hypothetically, if a bank were holding a note for $250,000 that was 90 days past due, and that bank was facing an audit, they might be willing to sell that note to a third party for, let's say, 60 cents on the dollar? I watched his eyes. I saw the mental math. If he kept the loan, he risked a total default. He would have to spend 2 years in court trying to seize assets that might already be depreciated. He would have to explain to his board why he let the loss fester. If he sold it to me, he took a hit. Sure. He lost 40%, but he got cash immediately. He cleared the bad debt off his books before the quarter ended. He saved his bonus. He washed his hands of Raymond Caldwell. 60 cents is an insult, Vance said, but he didn't leave the table. The collateral alone is worth 80. The collateral is 5-year-old machinery that has been run into the ground, I countered. And do you really want to pay a repo team to drag a bulldozer out of a mud pit in December? I am offering you an exit, Mr. Vance, clean, fast, cash wire by Friday. He hesitated. 75 cents. 65, I said. Final offer, and I will cover the legal transfer fees. He looked at his stake, then at me. I will have to run it by the credit committee. You do that, I said, signaling the waiter for the check. But tell them the offer expires in 48 hours. I walked out of that restaurant knowing I had him. 2 days later, the wire transfer went through. Harrowvale Capital was now the legal owner of the Iron City Trust loan. I held the promissory note. I held the security agreement. I was now my father's creditor. But I didn't stop there. One creditor is a nuisance. A majority creditor is a god. I went to Allegheny Valley Bank next. Their exposure was smaller. An equipment loan for $150,000. The loan officer there was younger, more arrogant, but equally terrified of his superiors. I used the same pitch. I showed him that Iron City had already sold. The rats are leaving the ship, I told him gently. You do not want to be the last one holding the bag. Fear is a powerful motivator. He sold to me for 68 cents on the dollar. The third bank, Keystone Commercial, was the hardest. They held the mortgage on the company headquarters and a large working capital line. The total face value was $220,000. The banker, a woman named Mrs. Gable, no relation to my old boss, was stubborn. She believed Raymond's charm. She believed his stories about the big municipal contract that was just around the corner. I had to dig deeper for her. I had David, my accountant, pull the tax liens. I found that Raymond had failed to pay payroll taxes for 2 quarters. The IRS had not filed a lien yet, but they had sent a notice of intent. I brought that notice to Mrs. Gable. The IRS eats first, I reminded her. If they slap a lien on the assets, your collateral position becomes worthless. You are second in line behind the government. Do you really want to gamble 200 grand on whether Raymond pays his taxes? Her face went pale. In the world of banking, the IRS is the only thing scarier than a default. She sold the debt to me the next morning. I sat in my office on a Friday evening, the city lights flickering below me. My desk was covered in thick stacks of paper, assignments of mortgage, allonges to promissory notes, UCC3, assignment statements. I picked up a pen and did the math. I had bought the Iron City loan. Face value? $250,000. I had bought the Allegheny loan. Face value? $150,000. I had bought the Keystone loan. Face value? $220,000. I punched the numbers into my calculator, just to see them glow in green. Total principal balance, $620,000. It was not a number that would make headlines on Wall Street. To a hedge fund manager in New York, this was lunch money. But in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, for a family construction business that was operating on razor-thin margins, $620,000 was an extinction event. I ran my finger over the signature line on the Iron City note. Raymond Caldwell. The signature was bold, looped, confident. It was the signature of a man who thought he would always be able to talk his way out of trouble. He had no idea that the bank managers he played golf with had sold him out. He had no idea that the investors at Harrowvale Capital were actually his disowned daughter. He probably thought he still had months to juggle the payments. To rob one account to feed another, he was wrong. Most loan agreements have a clause called a cross-default provision. It means that if you default on one loan, you are automatically in default on all of them, by buying all three. I had linked the chains together. I controlled the entire ecosystem of his debt. I could call the loans. I could accelerate the payments. I could demand the full $620,000 be paid immediately, or I would foreclose on everything: the trucks, the excavators, the building, and because of the personal guarantees, his house. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the skyline. I felt a strange vibration in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was the cold, heavy satisfaction of a structural engineer who has identified the exact load-bearing beam that holds up a rotten building. I had the hammer in my hand. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "Sarah." "It is done," I said. "We have the position. Prepare the notices." "When do you want to send them?" she asked. "Monday morning," I said. "Let him have one last weekend of thinking he is the king." I hung up. I looked at the file named Caldwell. It was no longer just a spreadsheet. It was a weapon. $620,000. I closed my eyes and pictured the dining room table where he had kicked me out. I pictured the snow. I pictured the look of disgust on his face. "You called me a liability," I whispered to the empty office. "Now, I am the owner of yours." Monday morning arrived with the gray, oppressive weight of a Pittsburgh winter, but inside the climate-controlled office of Harrowvale Capital, the atmosphere was electric. I sat at my desk, the surface clear of everything except a single phone and a notepad. The acquisitions were complete. The paperwork was filed. The trap was armed. Now, it was time to close the cage. I had spent the weekend finalizing the portfolio. I now owned 90% of the external debt of Caldwell Ridge Contracting. I was the captain of his sinking ship, and he didn't even know I was on board yet. My first move was not to call Raymond. That would be too personal. That would be emotional. Instead, I called the credit directors of the banks one last time to confirm the transfer of servicing rights. I needed to ensure that if Raymond called them in a panic, they would give him the standard script we had agreed upon. I dialed the number for the senior workout officer at Keystone Commercial. My voice was steady, pitched low and devoid of any daughterly inflection. "This is Natalie Sanders from Harrowvale," I said. "We are finalizing the assumption of the Caldwell notes. I am calling to confirm that your team has scrubbed the account from your active ledger." "Ms. Sanders," the officer replied. sounding relieved. Yes, the files are closed on our end. We have already sent the notification of assignment to the borrower. And if he calls? I asked, though I knew the answer. We tell him the debt has been sold to a private equity firm specializing in distressed assets and that he needs to direct all inquiries to you. We wash our hands of it. Good, I said. Thank you for the business. I hung up. I did the same with Iron City and Allegheny. The conversations were brief. These bankers were not my enemies. They were my enablers. They had been all too happy to sell because they were tired of Raymond's act. During my due diligence, one of the loan officers had let slip a detail that fueled my resolve. He told me that while Raymond was asking for a 3-month extension on his interest payments, due to supply chain hardships, he had been seen driving a brand new luxury SUV, a customized import that cost more than a project manager made in 2 years. That was the detail that killed him. Bankers understand hardship. They do not forgive hypocrisy. They sold him out not just because of the risk, but because he had insulted their intelligence. At 10 o'clock, I instructed my attorney, Sarah, to send the email. It was not a lawsuit. It was a notice of debt consolidation and acceleration. The subject line was dry and terrifyingly vague. Urgent. Credit facility restructuring / Caldwell Ridge Contracting. Attached was a formal letter stating that Harrowvale Capital was now the sole holder of his primary equipment loans, his revolving credit line, and the mortgage on his headquarters. We cited the cross-default provisions, we pointed out the arrears, and then we dropped the hammer. We gave him a 48-hour window. The letter stated, "The new creditor is willing to discuss a forbearance agreement to prevent immediate foreclosure proceedings. The borrower has 48 hours to respond with a viable repayment strategy. Failure to respond will result in the immediate seizure of collateral." 48 hours. It was a psychological torture device. It was enough time to panic, but not enough time to find a new lender. No bank in the world would underwrite a refinance for a company in his condition in 2 days. I was forcing him into a room with me. I waited. I knew his schedule. Mondays were for his executive strategy meetings, which usually involved him yelling at his site foreman about timelines that were impossible to meet. He would check his email around noon. After his lunch, at 12:30, the phone on my desk rang. The caller ID displayed the main line of Caldwell Ridge Contracting. I let it ring 3 times. In the world of power dynamics, picking up on the first ring makes you look eager. Picking up on the third makes you look busy. I pressed the speaker button. "Harrowvale Capital," I said. I did not give my name. "Who is this?" The voice was booming, aggressive, and instantly familiar. It was the voice that had ordered me out of his house 7 years ago. "I want to speak to the person in charge. This is Raymond Caldwell." My heart hammered against my ribs, a physical thud that echoed in my ears, but my hands remained perfectly still on the desk. I had rehearsed this. I had practiced this conversation in the shower, in the car, in my dreams for 2,000 days. "You are speaking to the portfolio manager," I said. My voice was cool, detached. I dropped my register slightly, sounding older, bored. "How can I help you, Mr. Caldwell?" "Help me?" he scoffed. "You can help me by explaining why I just got a letter threatening to steal my trucks. I have been banking with Keystone for 20 years. Who do you think you are? Buying my paper without my permission?" The debt was for sale. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, cutting him off. "Harrowvale Capital purchased it legally. We own the notes. We own the terms. And currently, you are in default on $620,000 of principal and interest." There was a silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the rustle of papers. He was shocked that I wasn't apologizing. He was used to bankers who treated him with kid gloves because of his local fame. He wasn't used to a faceless voice that treated him like a math problem. "Look," he said, his tone shifting from anger to a condescending charm. It was the shift he used when he needed something. "I don't know who you are, sweetheart, but you obviously don't know how the construction business works. Cash flow is lumpy. We are waiting on a check from the city. It is coming next week. I just need a little breathing room. Sweetheart. The word grated on my nerves like sandpaper, but I used the irritation to sharpen my focus. He thought I was a secretary. He thought I was a gatekeeper he could bypass. The time for breathing room was 6 months ago when you stopped paying the principal, I said. We are not a bank. Mr. Caldwell, we are a distressed debt fund. We do not wait for checks from the city. We look at the collateral. You want my equipment? He laughed. A harsh, forced sound. Good luck. Without those machines, the job stops. If the job stops, nobody gets paid. You think you are smart, but you are just going to bankrupt the only source of revenue you have. That is a risk we have calculated, I lied. I had no intention of stopping the work. I wanted the company to survive. I just wanted him out of it. However, the notice stands. You have 48 hours to propose a restructuring plan, or we send the trucks. Fine, he snapped. You want a plan? I will give you a plan, but I have conditions. You are not in a position to set conditions, I said. I am Raymond Caldwell, he shouted. The facade cracked. I built this town. Now listen to me. I will agree to a payment schedule. I will sign whatever higher interest rate you vultures want, but nothing touches the personal assets. I leaned in closer to the speakerphone. This was it. This was the tell. Clarify, I said. The house on the lake, he said, his voice lowering. And the vehicles, specifically, the S-Class and the Rover. Those are off the table. They are essential for business development. I need to maintain the image of the firm to get the contracts. If you touch my personal property, I will burn the whole company down. I will file Chapter 11 tomorrow and tie you up in court for 5 years. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. He wasn't fighting for his employees. He wasn't fighting to save the legacy of the company for his future grandchildren. He was fighting to keep his vacation home and his luxury car. He was terrified of the country club finding out he was broke. He was willing to pay usurious interest rates, willing to bleed the company dry, just to keep the paint on the walls looking fresh. He was worrying about the skin while I was preparing to break the bones. We are amenable to a discussion, I said, pausing for effect. Harrow Vale is interested in a resolution that keeps the company operational. We do not want your car, Mr. Caldwell. We want competence. Right, he said, mistaking my strategy for capitulation. Exactly. Competence. That is what I provide. We need to meet, I said. To sign the restructuring agreement, face to face, tomorrow. Tomorrow is Tuesday, he grumbled. I have a Rotary Club lunch. Cancel it, I said. Unless you want the tow trucks to arrive during the appetizer. He huffed, a sound of annoyance, but he conceded. Fine, come to my office. 2 o'clock. No, I said. We will not meet at your office. I needed him out of his element. If I went to his office, he would sit behind his big desk, surrounded by his awards and his framed photos of politicians. He would feel powerful. I needed him in a neutral space, but one where he felt a false sense of security. There is a conference center at the Hale Merritt Law offices downtown, I said. We have reserved the boardroom on the 30th floor. Hale Merritt. That was the firm of Duncan Hale, his personal lawyer. Duncan's office? Raymond sounded surprised, then pleased. You want to meet at my lawyer's office? It is a convenient location, I said, and since Mr. Hale will need to review the documents anyway, it saves time. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh of victory this time. He thought I was stupid. He thought I had just conceded the home field advantage. He thought that by walking into his lawyer's den, I was walking into a trap. He had no idea that I had already spent the last 6 months analyzing Duncan Hale's finances. He had no idea that I knew Duncan was just as desperate, just as leveraged, and just as compromised as he was. That works for me, Raymond said, his confidence fully restored. See? We can be civilized. I will see you at 2 o'clock. And bring a pen. I expect we will wrap this up in 20 minutes. I will be there, I said. And send me the draft agreement beforehand. he commanded. I don't like surprises. The agreement will be present at the meeting, I said. Good day. Mr. Caldwell. I cut the line before he could argue. The room was silent again. I stared at the phone. My hands were finally shaking. A delayed reaction to the adrenaline. Hearing his voice had brought it all back. The smell of the dinner, the cold of the snow, the feeling of absolute worthlessness he had instilled in me. But the shaking didn't last. I looked at the file on my screen. I looked at the number. $620,000. He thought he had won a small victory by setting the meeting at his lawyer's office. He thought he was walking in to bully a junior financier into letting him keep his toys. He didn't know that the liability he had kicked out was not coming alone. I was bringing the truth, and I was bringing the checkbook that had already bought the loyalty of the man sitting next to him. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked gray and hard, like iron. Enjoy the lake house tonight, Dad, I whispered. It is the last night you will sleep there without wondering when the locks are going to change. I turned back to my desk. I had one more call to make. I had to call the lawyer, Duncan Hale, and remind him of who actually owned his debt. The predator does not just hunt the prey, the predator isolates it. And Raymond Caldwell was about to walk into that room completely alone, to take down a king. You do not attack him directly, not at first. If you strike at the king, his guards will close ranks, their shields will lock together, and you will break your spear against a wall of loyalty and paid protection. To take down a king, you must first quietly, methodically, and without mercy, slit the throats of the guards. In Raymond Caldwell's world, the captain of the guard was Duncan Hale. Duncan was a named partner at Hale & Merritt, a boutique law firm that occupied the top 2 floors of a granite tower on Grant Street. He was the kind of lawyer who wore Italian loafers and had a smile that stopped exactly at his teeth. For 20 years, he had been my father's legal battering ram. He was the one who drafted the cease and desist letters to unhappy customers. He was the one who buried subcontractors in discovery paperwork until they went bankrupt. And, I suspected, he was the one who had drawn up the fraudulent loan documents that my father had forced me to sign. He projected an image of invincible success. He drove a Porsche. He vacationed in the Hamptons. He sat on the board of the local opera. But I knew something about Duncan Hale that Raymond Caldwell did not. I knew that Duncan was broke. It had taken me 4 weeks of digging to find the cracks in his armor, while I was building the file on my father. I had run a parallel investigation on his counsel. It is a known fact in the distressed debt industry that lawyers are often the worst money managers. They confuse cash flow with net worth. They spend next year's bonus before they have earned it. Duncan was a classic case. I found the first thread in a public listing of tax liens. Duncan had been late on his property taxes for his primary residence twice in the last 3 years. That was a red flag. A partner at a major firm does not miss a tax payment unless he literally does not have the liquid cash in his checking account. I pulled the string, and the whole tapestry unraveled. Duncan had borrowed heavily to buy his way into the partnership at Hale & Merritt. That was a standard commercial loan, serviced by a large national bank. But then, 3 years ago, he had gotten greedy. He had taken out a massive personal loan to invest in a tech startup based in Austin, Texas. He thought he was going to be a venture capitalist. He thought he was going to triple his money. The startup had imploded 6 months ago. The equity was zero, but the debt remained. I traced the loan. It had been originated by a peer-to-peer lending platform that catered to high-net-worth individuals. But when Duncan stopped paying, they had sold the bad debt to a generic asset recovery firm in New Jersey. The principal balance was $145,000. The interest rate was floating at 12%. Duncan was drowning. He was paying the minimums on his credit cards to service the interest on his partnership loan. While ignoring the massive hole from his failed investment, he was one lawsuit away from professional ruin. In Pennsylvania, a lawyer who demonstrates financial irresponsibility can face scrutiny from the ethics board, especially if they handle client escrow accounts. If a judgment was entered against him, his partners would vote him out to protect the firm's reputation. And Raymond? If Raymond found out his pit bull was toothless and broke, he would fire him immediately. Raymond despised weakness. I sat in my office, staring at the purchase agreement on my screen. I had contacted the New Jersey firm that morning. They were delighted to hear from me. To them, Duncan's debt was toxic waste. They had been trying to serve him with papers for weeks, but he was dodging the process servers, hiding behind his doorman and his receptionist. I offered them 50 cents on the dollar. They countered with 55. We settled at 52, for the price of $75,400. I bought the legal soul of Duncan Hale. I did not send a process server. I did not send a sheriff. I sent a courier. It was Monday afternoon. 3 hours after I had spoken to Raymond, I knew Duncan would be in his office, frantically trying to prepare a defense for my father against Harrowvale Capital. He would be looking for loopholes, researching my company, trying to find a way to invalidate the debt I held against Raymond. The courier delivered a single white envelope to the reception desk at Hale and Merritt. It was marked personal and confidential. I sat by my phone and waited. I pictured him opening it. I pictured him slicing the envelope with his silver letter opener, expecting a settlement offer or a threat from an opposing counsel. Instead, he would find a copy of his own promissory note. The letter attached was short. I had written it myself. Dear Mr. Hale, this letter serves as formal notice that the debt obligations previously held by Garden State Recovery regarding your personal loan have been acquired by a private holding company. As the new creditor, I am in possession of the original wet ink note and the confession of judgment you signed. You are currently in default in the amount of $145,000 plus accrued interest. Under the terms of your agreement, I have the right to file for immediate wage garnishment and to petition the court for a lien against your partnership interest in Hale and Merritt. However, I prefer a more constructive resolution. I believe we have mutual interests. I will call you in 10 minutes. Sincerely, the trustee. I checked my watch. 10 minutes. I let him sweat. I let him stare at the paper. I let him do the mental calculus of what would happen if his partners found out he was insolvent. I let him realize that he couldn't call Raymond for help because Raymond was the one man he couldn't show weakness to. At 3:15, I dialed his direct private line. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was breathless, stripped of its usual courtroom baritone. "Who is this?" he hissed. "Is this a joke?" "Mr. Hale," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, like a client asking about the weather. "I trust you received the package. It is not a joke. It is a balance sheet." "You can't do this," he stammered. "I am a partner at a law firm. I will sue you for harassment. I will bury you." "You can't sue me, Duncan," I said, using his first name to strip away the formality. "You can't afford the filing fee, and if you sue me, the docket becomes public. Do you want your senior partners to read about your failed tech investment in the Pittsburgh Gazette? Do you want the Bar Association to audit your personal finances?" There was silence. Heavy, terrified silence. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I don't have the cash. I can pay you $2,000 a month. That is the best I can do." "I don't want your money," I said. "Then what?" "I want you to be a good lawyer," I said. "I am the portfolio manager at Harrowvale Capital." I heard a sharp intake of breath. The connection clicked in his brain. The woman squeezing his client was the same woman holding a gun to his head. You are squeezing Raymond," he whispered. "This is conflict of interest. This is unethical. If I represent him while I owe you money—" "Exactly," I said. "It is a massive conflict of interest, which leaves you with two choices." I paused, letting the options form in the air between us. "Choice A," I continued. "You continue to act as Raymond's bulldog. You try to delay me. You try to hide his assets. You try to play games. If you do that, I will file the judgment against you tomorrow morning. By noon, your partners will know. By 5 o'clock, you will be clearing out your desk. And Raymond, when he finds out you are useless to him, he will drop you. You know he will." Duncan didn't argue. He knew Raymond better than anyone. He knew that loyalty to Raymond Caldwell flowed in only one direction, upward. Choice B, I said. You realize that you are compromised. You recuse yourself from representing him in any litigation. However, for the purpose of the restructuring meeting tomorrow, you remain in the room. You advise him to sign the deal because it is legally the only option he has to save the company. You ensure that every document he provides to me is accurate, complete, and verified. You do not hide assets. You do not lie. You play it straight. You want me to sell him out, Duncan said, his voice trembling. No, I corrected him. I want you to stop helping him commit fraud. There is a difference. I am not asking you to plant evidence. I am asking you to stop burying it. If you do this, if you facilitate a clean, legal transfer of control, I will restructure your personal debt. I will give you a 5-year term at 2% interest. I will keep it private. Your partners will never know. It was a lifeline. I was offering him salvation in exchange for his silence. He will kill me, Duncan said. He won't kill you, I said. He will fire you, but you will still have your license, your partnership, and your house. If you fight me, you lose everything. I could hear the gears turning. Duncan was a survivalist. He wasn't a true believer in the Church of Raymond. He was a mercenary, and a mercenary always goes with the winning side. The meeting is tomorrow at 2, he said, his voice defeated. I know, I said. I said it. He wants to hide the lake house, Duncan blurted out. It was his first offering, his first betrayal. He told me to draft a quitclaim deed to transfer it to his brother's name this morning, backdated to last month. And did you? I asked. I drafted it, he said, but I haven't filed it with the county clerk yet. Don't, I ordered. If that deed is filed, I will consider it a fraudulent conveyance and I will come for you personally. Bring the unfiled deed to the meeting. We will use it as leverage. Okay, he said. Okay, I will do it. One more thing. Duncan, I said. When I walk into that room tomorrow, you are going to treat me with the utmost respect. You are going to validate my authority. You are going to tell Raymond that I have him in a checkmate. Because if you give him even a sliver of false hope, I will pull the trigger on you. Do we understand each other? We understand each other, he said. Good. See you at 2. I hung up the phone. I sat back in my chair and exhaled a long breath. I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. It was a dirty move. It was the kind of move my father would have respected. Had he been the one making it? But the difference was the intent. My father used leverage to exploit the weak. I was using leverage to disarm the strong. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror that hung on the back of my office door. I looked at myself. I was wearing a sharp navy blazer and a white silk blouse. My hair was pulled back in a tight, professional bun. I looked nothing like the girl in the oversized sweater who had walked out into the snow. But in my eyes, I could still see her. I could see the fire that had kept her warm that night. Dad thinks he has a lawyer, I whispered to my reflection. He thinks he has a shield. He thinks he is walking into a negotiation with a friend at his side. I reached out and touched the cold glass of the mirror. I slept surprisingly well. I didn't dream of snow. I dreamt of ink. I dreamt of signatures drying on paper, locking doors, sealing fates. When I woke up on Tuesday morning, the sky was clear, the storm had passed. Or perhaps, the storm was just arriving, and I was the eye of it. I drank my coffee black. I kissed Maya goodbye and dropped her at school. Be good, I told her. I am always good, she said, smiling that smile that was so much like mine. I know, I said. Mommy has a big meeting today. Are you going to win? She asked. She didn't know what I did. Not really. She just knew I worked with numbers. Yes, I said. I am going to win. I drove to the downtown office of Hale and Merritt. I parked my car in the garage. I took the elevator to the 30th floor. The receptionist looked at me with wide eyes. She knew who I was. She had delivered the envelope to Duncan yesterday. Ms. Sanders, she stammered. Mr. Hale and Mr. Caldwell are waiting for you in conference room A. Thank you, I said. I walked down the long hallway, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The walls were lined with portraits of old men in wigs, the founders of the firm. They looked down on me with stern expressions. I didn't care. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the conference room. I paused for a second. I took a deep breath. Inside that room was the past. Inside that room was the man who had created me and then tried to destroy me. Inside that room was the lawyer who had enabled him, but inside that room, there was also something else. There was a reckoning. I pushed the doors open and walked in. The meeting with Duncan Hale at his office had been a prelude, a necessary breaking of the guard dog before I could get to the master. Once I had Duncan's loyalty secure, bought and paid for with the leverage of his own secret debt, I changed the venue for the final execution. I did not want the closing to happen in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was Raymond's kingdom. In Pittsburgh, he knew the parking valets, the security guards, and the judges. I needed him unmoored. I needed him tired, annoyed, and out of his element. So, I demanded that the restructuring agreement be signed in Cleveland, Ohio. I rented a conference suite in a sterile, high-rise glass tower overlooking Lake Erie. It was a virtual office rental, the kind used by shell companies and traveling consultants. It had no soul, no history, and most importantly, no connection to the Caldwell name. It smelled of ozone and rental furniture. I was not in the room, not physically. I was sitting in the adjoining technical control booth, separated from the conference room by a wall that looked like a mirror from their side, but was transparent glass from mine. I had a headset on, listening to the audio feed that was being captured by the omnidirectional microphone on the table. In the center of the conference table, facing the empty chairs where Raymond and his entourage would sit, was a laptop. The webcam was active, the green light glowing steadily. On the screen, they would see a static logo of Harrowvale Capital and a connecting status bar. Duncan had been instructed to tell them that the investors were in Toronto, stuck in a blizzard, and would be monitoring the signing remotely. It was a lie that served two purposes. First, it explained my absence. Second, it made Raymond feel superior. He would think the investors were too lazy or disorganized to show up, reinforcing his belief that he was dealing with amateurs he could outwit. At exactly 2:00, the heavy door opened. Duncan walked in first. He looked pale. His suit was immaculate, but I could see a sheen of sweat on his upper lip even through the glass. He carried a leather briefcase that contained the documents I had drafted, the documents that would end Raymond's career. He arranged them on the table with trembling hands, then looked up at the mirror. He couldn't see me, but he knew I was there. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Then, Raymond Caldwell entered. He had aged in 7 years, but not in a way that softened him. His face was ruddier, the lines around his mouth deeper, etched by years of shouting orders and drinking scotch. He wore a camel hair coat that cost more than my first car, and he walked with the heavy, rolling gait of a man who expects the world to move out of his way. And trailing behind him, carrying a stack of blueprints that no one had asked for, was Ethan Price. Seeing Ethan again was a physical blow, like a punch to the solar plexus. The last time I had seen him, he was wearing a hard hat and telling me that my pregnancy was inconvenient for his promotion. Now, he was 32 years old. He wore a suit that was a cheap imitation of Raymond's. His hair was slicked back, and he had the anxious, eager-to-please energy of a golden retriever that had been kicked too many times but still hoped for a treat. He wasn't a partner. He was a caddy. He was the yes man Raymond kept around to validate his own genius. Cleveland, Raymond grumbled, throwing his coat onto an empty chair. God-forsaken city. Why could we not do this at the club? These finance guys are so dramatic. It is standard procedure for this fund. Ray, Duncan said. His voice was tight, but steady enough. They insist on neutral ground for the closing. Jurisdictional reasons. Raymond scoffed and sat at the head of the table. Ethan sat to his right, immediately opening a notebook and clicking a pen. ready to take notes that would never be read. "Well, let's get on with it," Raymond said, gesturing at the laptop. "Are they on? Can they hear me?" "The audio is one way for now," Duncan lied smoothly. "They are reviewing the final compliance checks. They can see us, but they will not interrupt unless there is an issue. We are on a strict timeline. Ray, the wire transfer window closes at 5 o'clock. If we don't have signatures by 3, the funds won't clear until next week." "Next week is too late," Raymond snapped. "I have the union reps breathing down my neck for the pension contribution. If I don't pay them by Friday, they walk off the stadium job." This was it, the confession. I adjusted the volume on my headset, making sure the recording software was capturing every syllable. "So," Raymond continued, leaning back and putting his feet up on the rung of the chair, "what is the damage? What did you get them to agree to?" Duncan slid a thick document across the table. "It is a restructuring and forbearance agreement. Essentially, Harrow Vale buys out the positions from Iron City, Allegheny, and Keystone. They consolidate it into one new loan of $620,000. They are giving you a 12-month interest-only period to stabilize cash flow." "Interest only?" Raymond grinned, looking at Ethan. "See? I told you. Ethan, you just have to know how to squeeze these suits. They were desperate to buy the paper. Now we have a year before we have to pay a dime of principal." "It is a good deal, sir," Ethan said, nodding vigorously. "You played it perfectly." "Of course I did," Raymond said. He picked up the document and flipped the pages carelessly, not reading a single word. "So, we take the cash injection from the restructuring. How much is the new liquidity?" "There is an additional operating line of $50,000 included," Duncan said. "Perfect," Raymond said. "Here is the plan. We use the $50,000 to shut the union up. Then, we take the revenue from the stadium deposit, when it comes, and we divert it to the Lakeview project. I need to get the roof on the boathouse before the inspectors come back." I froze. He was admitting to commingling funds. He was admitting that he intended to use company operating capital for his personal property, the boathouse at his lake estate. "Ray," Duncan warned, glancing nervously at the laptop, "you need to be careful. This agreement has strict covenants about the use of funds. It is for commercial operation only." "Oh, stop it, Duncan," Raymond laughed. "Money is money. It all goes into the same pot, as long as I make the monthly interest payment. These Toronto idiots won't know if I spent the money on concrete or on caviar. They are just looking at a spreadsheet. They don't know how to run a construction company." He looked at the laptop camera, staring directly into my eyes without knowing it, and winked. "Don't worry," he said to the camera. "Your money is safe with me." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. He hadn't changed. He hadn't learned. He was exactly the same man who had forged my signature 7 years ago. He viewed laws as suggestions and contracts as inconveniences. "You need to sign, Ray," Duncan said, pushing the pen toward him. "But before you do, I have to legally advise you to read Clause 14, the acceleration clause." "I don't pay you to make me read," Raymond said. "Summarize it," Duncan swallowed hard. "It states that if any representation made in this agreement is found to be false, specifically regarding the status of the collateral, the entire debt becomes due immediately, not in 30 days, immediately, and it grants the creditor the right to bypass the courts and seize assets directly." "Collateral," Raymond waved his hand. "The trucks, the dozers, they are fine. They are sitting in the yard." "Are they?" Duncan asked. It was the only hint he gave. "The schedule lists 8 excavators and 4 dump trucks. Are they all currently in your possession and free of other liens?" Yes, Raymond said impatiently. "Technically, 2 of the excavators are, let's say, on loan to my brother-in-law's site in West Virginia, and I might have used the titles for a short-term bridge loan with that guy in McKeesport. But I will pay that off next week. It is fine. It is all in the family." "Ray," Duncan said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "if you sign this, and those excavators are not in the yard, you are committing fraud, and you are handing them the keys to everything." Raymond glared at him. Whose side are you on? Duncan? You are acting like a nervous grandmother. Do you want me to sign this and get the $50,000 to pay your legal fees? Or do you want to lecture me on ethics? I want you to understand the risk, Duncan said. The risk is zero, Raymond declared, because nobody checks. In 20 years, has a banker ever actually driven out to the yard to count the trucks? No. They look at the paper. You handle the paper. Duncan, make it look right. He grabbed the pen. Where do I sign? Duncan reached over and flipped to the signature page. He pointed to the line marked Borrower. Raymond Caldwell, President. Raymond didn't hesitate. He slashed his signature across the line with a flourish. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was loud in the silence of the room. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. There, Raymond said, tossing the pen down. Done. Easy money. We need a witness, Duncan said softly. To attest that the signature was voluntary and that the signatory holds the authority, Raymond turned to Ethan. You are up, kid. Make yourself useful. Ethan beamed. He adjusted his tie and pulled the document toward him. He treated the moment with reverence, as if he were signing the Declaration of Independence. It is an honor, sir, Ethan said. Just sign it, Ethan, Raymond muttered, checking his watch. Ethan signed his name. Ethan Price, project manager. I watched him do it. I watched the father of my child, the man who had abandoned us for a career, sign his name next to the man who had destroyed my life. By signing as a witness, Ethan was legally affirming that he had witnessed the execution of the document, but more importantly, in the eyes of the company hierarchy, he was binding himself to the lie. If the collateral was missing, and as a project manager, he knew the equipment was in West Virginia. He was now complicit in the misrepresentation. He had just handcuffed himself to a sinking ship. Done and done, Raymond said, standing up and clapping his hands. Duncan, send the wire instructions. I want that cash in the operating account by tomorrow morning. I have a dinner reservation at the steakhouse, and I intend to celebrate. He looked at the laptop one last time. Pleasure doing business with you, whoever you are, he said to the webcam. You made the right choice backing Caldwell Ridge. Duncan collected the papers. He didn't look at Raymond. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the mirror. He held the signed document up for a brief second, showing me the ink, confirming the kill. I will process the filing immediately, Duncan said. You guys head out. I have to scan these and upload them to the secure portal. Don't take too long, Raymond said, buttoning his coat. Come on, Ethan, let's get a drink. You earned it. Yes, sir, Ethan said, scrambling to gather his blueprints. They turned toward the door. They were smiling. They were confident. They thought they had just pulled off another miracle, dodging the bullet of bankruptcy with a fresh infusion of cash from a faceless investor. They had no idea that the investor was standing 10 feet away, holding the remote control to their destruction. I waited until they were almost at the door. I waited until Raymond reached for the handle. Then, I pressed the button on the console in front of me. The magnetic locks on the conference room door engaged with a loud, metallic thud. Raymond pulled on the handle. It didn't budge. He frowned and pulled again. Harder. What the hell? He muttered. Duncan, the door is stuck. It shouldn't be, Duncan said from the table. He hadn't moved. He was standing very still, clutching his briefcase. Well, call the building manager, Raymond barked, rattling the handle. I am not getting trapped in a box in Cleveland. You are not trapped. Raymond, I said. I didn't speak into the headset. I spoke into the room air. I walked out of the control booth and into the small hallway that connected to the conference room. There was a secondary door, the one I had entered through. I pushed it open. The sound of the door opening made Raymond and Ethan spin around. I stepped into the room. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, thick, and suffocating. I stood there in my black suit, the one that looked like a funeral director's cut. I held nothing in my hands. I didn't need to. The signed contract on the table was the only weapon I needed. Raymond stared at me. His eyes narrowed, trying to process the context. He saw his daughter, the girl he had kicked out, standing in a high-end conference room in Cleveland. His brain couldn't bridge the gap. He thought I was there to beg. He thought I had tracked him down to ask for money. "Natalie?" he said, his voice confused, irritated. "What are you doing here? How did you know I was here? Did Duncan tell you?" He turned to glare at Duncan, but Duncan was looking at the floor. "Hello, Dad?" I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the predator who has already eaten and is just playing with the bones. "Hello, Ethan?" Ethan looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He took a step back, instinctively moving behind Raymond. "I don't have time for this," Raymond snapped, regaining his composure. "I don't know what kind of stalker game you are playing, but we are in the middle of a high-level financial closing. You need to leave, now, or I will have security throw you out." I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in his presence in 7 years. "You can't throw me out, Dad," I said softly. I walked over to the table. I picked up the document he had just signed. The ink was still wet. "Why?" he sneered. "Because you think you are special?" "No," I said, holding up the paper. "Because I am Harrowvale Capital." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical shutter closing. His eyes went from irritation to confusion to a dawn of horrifying realization. He looked at the laptop with the Harrowvale logo. He looked at Duncan, who was refusing to meet his eyes. He looked at the contract, and then he looked at me. "You?" he whispered. "You bought the debt?" "I bought it all," I said. "Iron City, Allegheny, Keystone, and now," I tapped the signature page. "I own this. I own the restructuring agreement. I own the confession of judgment. And I own the acceleration clause you just violated." "Violated?" he stammered. "I just signed it. I haven't even left the room." "You just admitted, on a recorded line," I pointed to the webcam, "that your collateral is missing. You admitted to commingling funds. You admitted to fraud." I slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "The 48-hour window is closed. Raymond," I said, using his first name for the first time, "I am accelerating the debt, all of it, $620,000, payable now." I looked at Ethan, who was trembling against the wall. "And you, Ethan," I said, "you just witnessed a fraudulent contract. Congratulations, you are now a co-conspirator." Raymond looked at his hands. The hands that had built a fake empire. They were shaking uncontrollably. "But," he choked out, Duncan, do something. Tell her she can't do this." Raymond turned to his lawyer, his last hope, his paid protector. Duncan finally looked up. He looked at Raymond with eyes that were tired and sad, but resolved. "She can. Ray," Duncan said quietly. "She can do exactly that. You signed it." The trap wasn't just closed. It was welded shut. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized, like the air inside a submarine that had just dived past its crush depth. Raymond Caldwell stood frozen, his hand halfway to his chest, as if reaching for a heart that I wasn't sure he actually possessed. The arrogance that had coated him like a second skin for 60 years was beginning to dissolve, revealing the raw, trembling panic underneath. I didn't give him time to recover. I didn't give him a moment to formulate a lie or a charm offensive. I walked to the head of the table, encroaching on the space he had commanded just moments ago. I placed a thick manila envelope on the polished wood surface. It hit the table with a dull thud, a sound that seemed to echo louder than a shout. "Open it," I said. Raymond stared at the envelope. He looked at it with the same wariness one might look at a bomb. "What is this?" he rasped. His voice was no longer booming. It was thin, reedy. "It is the reason you are finished," I answered. He didn't move, so I reached over and flipped the envelope open myself. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs and fanned them out across the table. Covering the signature page he had just executed, the photos were time-stamped. They were dated yesterday and this morning. This, I pointed to the first photo, is the equipment yard behind your headquarters in Pittsburgh. It is empty, the security fence is locked, but the gravel is bare. I pointed to the next one. And this is an impound lot in West Virginia, taken 3 hours ago by one of my field agents. Do you recognize that excavator? The one with the faded Caldwell Ridge decal on the side? Raymond's eyes darted across the images. He saw his secrets laid out in glossy 4x6 prints. He saw the visual proof of the assets he had sold off for cash under the table, the machines he had double-pledged to other lenders, the collateral that he had just sworn, in writing, was sitting safe and sound in his possession. "So?" he blustered, trying to summon a flicker of his old rage. "So I moved some equipment around. It is logistics. Natalie, I told Duncan I moved them. It is a temporary allocation of resources. It is a breach of warranty," I said, my voice cutting through his excuses like a scalpel. Clause 4, Section B of the agreement you just signed, states that the borrower warrants they have good and marketable title to all collateral listed in Schedule A, and that said collateral is free of liens and located at the primary place of business. I looked at him, dead in the eye. "You didn't just lie to me. Raymond, you lied to the contract, and because you signed that document while knowing the equipment was gone, you committed fraud in the inducement. That triggers the default clause immediately, not in 30 days, not in 24 hours, now." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't look at it. I just unlocked the screen and pressed a single pre-programmed button. It was a signal to Sarah, my attorney, and David, my forensic accountant, who were waiting on standby. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. His voice was high-pitched, cracking with fear. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. "I just executed the enforcement protocols," I said calmly. "At this exact moment, electronic notices are being sent to every bank where Caldwell Ridge holds an operating account. We are serving them with a writ of attachment based on the confession of judgment you signed." "You can't do that!" Raymond screamed. The color was returning to his face, but it was a blotchy, unhealthy purple. "That is illegal. You can't freeze my accounts without a court hearing. I have payroll on Friday. I have vendors to pay." "I don't need a hearing," I replied, tapping the document on the table. "You waived your right to a hearing. It is right there, in paragraph 20. The borrower hereby waives notice and hearing prior to the entry of judgment and authorizes the lender to confess judgment against the borrower. You gave me the keys, Dad. I am just driving the car." Raymond looked at Duncan. He turned on his heel and grabbed the lawyer by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit. "Do something," Raymond roared, shaking the smaller man. "You are my lawyer. Stop her. File an injunction. Tell her this is entrapment." Duncan didn't fight back. He didn't pull away. He just stood there, limp, his eyes cast down. He looked like a man who was attending his own funeral. "I can't." "Ray," Duncan whispered. "What do you mean you can't?" Raymond shouted, shoving him back against the wall. "I pay you to can. Fix this." "I advised you to read the clause," Duncan said, his voice trembling but audible. "I advised you to verify the collateral. You signed anyway. There is nothing I can file. The document is airtight. If I go to a judge now, I will be sanctioned for filing a frivolous motion." Raymond stared at him, betrayed. Then he spun back to me. He looked around the room, frantic, looking for an exit that didn't involve humiliation. There was none. "This is personal," Raymond hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This isn't business. This is just a vindictive little girl throwing a tantrum because Daddy didn't let her keep her bastard child in his house." The words hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Ethan flinched. He looked at me, then at Raymond. Realizing too late the toxicity of the man he had idolized, I didn't flinch. 7 years ago, those words would have destroyed me. Today, they were just noise. They were the desperate sounds of a prey animal caught in a snare. "You are right," I said. It is personal, but the debt is real, and the fraud is real. You built a company on lies. Raymond, you used my name to cover your debts 7 years ago. You committed identity theft against your own daughter. Did you think I forgot? Did you think I wouldn't count the cost? I did what I had to do to save the family, he yelled. I protected the name. No, I corrected him. You protected yourself, and now, to protect my investment, I am taking what is mine. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. A text from David. Accounts frozen. PNC and Chase just confirmed the lock. Treasury Management Services suspended. It is done, I announced. Your operating accounts are locked. Your credit lines are revoked. As of 2 minutes ago, Caldwell Ridge Contracting is insolvent. Raymond slumped. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was a collapse. He fell back into the chair he had vacated, his legs giving out. He stared at the table, at the photos of the empty yard. He looked smaller, shrunken inside his expensive coat. The reality was setting in. He couldn't write a check. He couldn't move money. He was the king of nothing. Then, Ethan spoke up. He stepped forward, smoothing his tie, trying to summon some semblance of professional negotiation. He looked at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes that used to look at me with love, or what I had thought was love. Natalie, he started, his voice soft, trying to evoke intimacy. Nat, please, look, Raymond. He is old school. He makes mistakes. But I am just the project manager. I didn't know about the missing equipment. I just signed where I was told. You can't hold me responsible for this. He took a step closer to me. We have a history, Nat. We have a daughter. Think about Maya. If I lose my job, if I get dragged into a legal mess, how does that help her? I can help you run the company. I know the projects. I can be your inside man. Just cut me loose from the lawsuit. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me sleeping in a car. I looked at the man who had chosen a steady paycheck over his own flesh and blood. And now, here he was, trying to trade on his paternity to save his own skin. Stop, I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Ethan froze. Do not say her name, I said. You haven't earned the right to speak her name. I am her father, he pleaded. You are a sperm donor, I said cold. And as for your involvement, you just signed that document as a witness. You attested that you watched Raymond sign. You attested that you are an officer of the company, in a court of law. That makes you a party to the fraud. You knew the equipment was in West Virginia. I have emails from you to the site foreman directing the transport of those excavators last week. Ethan's jaw dropped. You hacked my email? No, I said. The foreman in West Virginia is unhappy because you haven't paid him in 2 months. I bought his debt too. He gave me the emails voluntarily. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of him. You sold your pregnant girlfriend for a promotion. Ethan, I said, my voice low and hard. You sold your daughter for a title, and just now, you sold your signature to a fraudster because you were too cowardly to stand up to him. You don't get a deal. You don't get an escape hatch. You go down with the ship you helped build. Ethan slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was crouching, his head in his hands. He was crying, not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. I turned back to Raymond. He was staring at his hand, the hand that had held the pen. The repo teams are already en route to the active job sites, I told him. They will be securing the remaining assets within the hour. I suggest you call your site supervisors and tell them not to resist, if they fight. The police will be involved. You are taking the company, Raymond whispered. You are actually taking it. I am enforcing a security interest, I said. I am going to strip it, restructure it, and salvage what I can to repay the creditors, which is me. I am your father, he said again. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a question, a confused, pathetic question. How can you do this? You taught me, I said. You taught me that business comes first. You taught me that liabilities must be cut. You taught me that family is just a word you use to manipulate people. I picked up the signed contract. I folded it neatly and placed it back in my briefcase. You are a liability, Raymond, I said, echoing the words that had haunted me for 7 years. And I am liquidating you. He looked up at me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. True, unadulterated fear. He wasn't afraid of poverty. He wasn't afraid of jail. He was afraid of me. He was afraid of the monster he had created. He looked at the signature on the copy of the document that still lay on the table. His own signature. The jagged, arrogant scrawl that had been his pride. He realized then that he hadn't just signed a loan. He had signed his own death warrant. We are done here, I said. I looked at Duncan. Walk them out. And Duncan, make sure he doesn't take anything from the office. No laptops, no files. If he touches a single piece of company property, you call me. Yes, Ms. Sanders, Duncan said. He wouldn't look at Raymond. I walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see them crumble. I could hear it in the silence. I walked out of the conference room, down the hall, and into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 7 years. My hands were steady. My heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. I walked out of the building and into the cold Cleveland air. The wind was biting. But it didn't feel like the wind that night in Pittsburgh. That wind had been an enemy. This wind felt like applause. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the private school where Maya was currently in art class. Hello? The receptionist answered. Hi, this is Natalie Sanders, I said. I'm just calling to update my emergency contact list. I want to make sure that under no circumstances is anyone named Raymond Caldwell or Ethan Price allowed to pick up Maya. Can you confirm that is in the file? Yes, Ms. Sanders. We have the flag on the account. No unauthorized access. Thank you, I said. I hung up. The execution was complete. The king was dead. But the war wasn't over. A wounded animal is dangerous. And Raymond Caldwell was not the type to fade away quietly. He would try to strike back. He would try to use the one thing he thought I still cared about. He would try to use the public opinion. He would try to paint me as the villain. But he forgot one thing. I didn't care about being the hero. I just wanted to be the one left standing. I got into my car and started the engine. I had a company to seize. The euphoria of the Tuesday execution in Cleveland lasted exactly 72 hours. By Friday morning, the reality of war had set in. I was sitting in my office at Harrowvale, watching the live feed of a repossession team loading 3 of Raymond's dump trucks onto flatbeds in a muddy lot in McKeesport. It was a victory, undeniably. The company's assets were being secured, the accounts were frozen, and the name Caldwell Ridge Contracting was effectively dead in the water. But a dying animal bites hardest right before the end. At 10 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed me. Her voice was hesitant. Ms. Sanders, she said, there is a process server here. He says it is personal, not corporate. My stomach tightened. I knew the corporate legal notices were going to Raymond. Not coming from him. If a server was at my door, it meant they had opened a new front. I walked out to the lobby. The man was young, bored, chewing gum. He handed me a thick packet of papers. Natalie Sanders? He asked. Yes. You have been served. Emergency hearing regarding the custody of minor child Maya Sanders. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, family division. I looked down at the paperwork. The petitioner was Ethan Price. I didn't open the packet until I was back in my office with the door locked. I sat down and read it. It was a work of fiction so vile it made the fraud seem quaint. Ethan was petitioning for immediate temporary custody, alleging that I was mentally unstable, obsessive, and engaged in a personal vendetta that endangered the psychological well-being of the child. The narrative was crafted by Raymond. I could hear his voice in the phrasing. It claimed that I worked 20 hours a day, that I left Maya with strangers to pursue my revenge schemes, and that my recent hostile takeover of the family business proved I was acting out of manic hysteria. They were betting on my biology. They were betting that the mother in me would override the businesswoman. They thought that if they threatened to take Maya, I would drop the lawsuit, unfreeze the accounts, and give them back the company just to make the custody case go away. It was a ransom note disguised as a court filing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up the phone and dialed Elena Russo. Elena was not a corporate lawyer. She was a family law attorney who ate narcissists for breakfast. I had retained her 3 years ago, just in case this day ever came. "Elena," I said when she picked up. "They pulled the trigger. They want Maya." "Send me the docket number," Elena said instantly. "And Natalie? Don't panic. This is the desperation play. If they had real evidence of neglect, they would have called Child Protective Services years ago. They are filing this now because you are hurting their wallet." "I know," I said. "But we need to kill this, today." "We can't stop the hearing," Elena said. "But we can make them regret scheduling it. Meet me at the courthouse in 2 hours. We are going to file a motion to dismiss and a request for an emergency status conference." I drove to the courthouse. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This was different. Business was numbers. This was my blood. When I arrived at the courthouse conference room, a small, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and anxiety, Ethan was already there. He was sitting next to a man I recognized from billboards. Heavy set, expensive suit. The kind of lawyer who advertises on late-night TV promising to get fathers their rights back. His name was Mr. Sterling. Raymond was there too. Sitting in the corner like a general overseeing his troops, he looked tired. His skin was gray. And his suit looked like he had slept in it. The freeze on his accounts meant his dry cleaning and his barber were probably the first luxuries to go. "Natalie," Raymond said, nodding at me as if we were meeting for lunch. "You look stressed. This whole business is taking a toll on you, isn't it? Maybe it is time to focus on being a mother and leave the heavy lifting to the men." I ignored him. I sat down next to Elena. "Let's cut the theatrics," Elena said, opening her briefcase. "You have filed an emergency petition with zero evidence. Ms. Sanders is a model parent. We have school records, medical records, and affidavits from her childcare providers attesting to a stable, loving environment. This petition is harassment." "It is not harassment," Sterling blustered. "My client, Mr. Price, is the biological father. He is concerned. He believes the mother is using the child as a pawn in a corporate dispute." "A dispute," I said, speaking for the first time. "Where your client is a co-defendant accused of fraud." Ethan flinched. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the table. "That is civil court." Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "This is family court. And right now, Mr. Price is willing to offer a settlement. He will withdraw the petition for full custody if Ms. Sanders agrees to a joint custody arrangement, and if certain external stressors are removed from the family dynamic." "External stressors?" Elena laughed. "You mean the lawsuit where Ms. Sanders is suing your client's boss for $600,000? "It is all connected," Raymond interjected. "We just want peace. Give us back the company accounts. Drop the judgments. And Ethan drops the custody suit. We go back to being a family. Maya gets her dad. Everyone wins." I looked at Raymond. He really believed it. He believed he could trade my daughter like a piece of equipment. "I have a counteroffer," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a binder. It wasn't the legal binder Elena had brought. It was my personal binder. "This," I said, tapping the cover, "is a log of every single time Ethan has visited Maya in the last 7 years. It is blank, because he hasn't—" I flipped the page. "This is a log of every child support payment he has made. Also blank." I flipped to the 3rd section. "And this," I said, "is a copy of the bank transfer request I flagged this morning." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Sterling. "Ethan's lawyer." "What is this?" Sterling asked, picking it up. It is a wire transfer attempt, I explained. Ethan doesn't have the money to hire you. Mr. Sterling, his personal accounts are empty because he spent his paycheck on a lease for a sports car he can't afford. So, Raymond tried to pay your retainer, $5,000, from the Caldwell Ridge operating account. Sterling frowned. So, third-party payment is legal. It is, I agreed. But that account is frozen. I froze it on Tuesday. The check you are holding in your pocket? The one you took as a retainer this morning? It is going to bounce. In fact, it already has. Sterling pulled his phone out. He tapped the screen furiously, checking his firm's banking app. His face went slack. The wire was rejected, Sterling muttered. He looked at Ethan. You told me the funds were secured. They were, Ethan stammered. Ray said he had a bypass account. He said he could move the money. I am working on it, Raymond snapped. It is a glitch. Natalie locked the main accounts, but I have reserves. I will get you the cash by Monday. I don't work on credit, Sterling said. Standing up, he shoved his files back into his briefcase. Mr. Price, until the retainer clears, I am not your lawyer. I am not putting my license on the line for a client with NSF checks. Wait, Ethan grabbed his arm. You can't leave. The hearing is Monday. Then you better find $5,000 by Monday. Sterling said cold. He looked at me, gave a brief nod of respect to the predator in the room, and walked out. Ethan sat there, abandoned. The silence was deafening, but I wasn't done. And speaking of lawyers, I said, turning to Raymond, where is Duncan? Shouldn't he be here helping you construct this blackmail scheme? Raymond scowled. Duncan is busy. He is handling the corporate filings. No, he isn't, I said. I signaled to Elena. She handed me another document, a formal notice of withdrawal of counsel. Duncan filed this an hour ago, I said, sliding it to Raymond. He is recusing himself from all matters related to Caldwell Ridge and Raymond Caldwell due to an insurmountable conflict of interest. What conflict? Raymond spit out. I have paid that man millions. The conflict, I said softly, is that he owes me money too. I bought his personal debt. Raymond, just like I bought yours. Duncan belongs to me now. He isn't going to help you hide assets. He isn't going to help you fight me. He is gone. Raymond stared at the paper. His mouth opened and closed. For the first time, he realized the extent of the web I had spun. I hadn't just cut his supply lines. I had bought his soldiers. You, Raymond whispered. You turned him. I gave him a choice, I said. Integrity or bankruptcy. He chose integrity. Which brings us to you. Ethan. Ethan looked up. He was pale, sweating. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a grocery store. You have no lawyer, I said. You have no money. You have no case. And you just filed a frivolous petition in family court that alleges I am unfit. Do you know what happens when you lie to a family court judge? I didn't lie, Ethan cried. Raymond told me. He said you were unstable. He said we had to do this to save the company. He used you, I said. Just like he used me. And now, look at him. I pointed at Raymond. Raymond was furiously digging through his own briefcase, trying to find something, anything, to regain control. He pulled out a crumpled document. I can prove the company is viable, Raymond shouted, his logic fracturing under the pressure. I signed an affidavit. Look, I signed it this morning. It explains the equipment. It says that the missing excavators were just a clerical error, that my secretary signed the wrong logs. It proves I didn't mean to defraud anyone. He slammed the paper on the table, thinking it was a shield. I looked at it. I read the paragraph he was pointing to. Affiant states that during the period of January to March, numerous equipment logs were signed by administrative staff using a signature stamp or by signing the affiant's name with permission, leading to potential discrepancies in location data. I started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless laugh. Dad, I said, do you know what you just did? I explained the mistake, he insisted. No, I said. You just admitted. in a sworn affidavit, that you authorized the forgery of safety and location logs. You just admitted that the signatures on the federal transport manifests, which are required by the Department of Transportation, were faked. That isn't a clerical error. That is a federal crime. Raymond froze. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. And I continued. Since you just admitted that other people signed your name, you have just opened the door for me to challenge every single contract you have ever executed, including the one where you made me guarantee your loans 7 years ago. You just gave me the evidence to prove that my signature on those guarantees might have been administrative error too. He had tried to write his way out of a corner and had accidentally confessed to a decade of malpractice. Elena, I said to my lawyer, please take custody of that affidavit. We will be submitting it to the court as evidence of the petitioner's lack of credibility and the grandfather's criminal liability. Consider it done, Elena said, snatching the paper before Raymond could react. Raymond sat back, defeated. He had no money. He had no lawyer. He had just handed the enemy a loaded gun. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I looked at Ethan. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. He realized now that there was no custody battle. There was only him, alone, facing a woman he had underestimated for a decade. Ethan, I said, you wanted to be a father? Being a father isn't about owning a child. It is about protecting them. You tried to use Maya as a bargaining chip to save your job. That is the definition of unfit. I leaned in close, so only they could hear me. You used Maya as a weapon, I said, my voice shaking the air between us. But I used the truth as a shield, and my shield just broke your sword. I turned to Raymond. The hearing is Monday, I said. I will be there. Elena will be there, and I suggest you bring a toothbrush, Dad, because after I show this affidavit to the judge and then hand it over to the district attorney, you might not be going home. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I walked down the long hallway of the courthouse, the click of my heels echoing on the marble. I felt lighter. The fear of losing Maya, the one terror that had kept me awake at night, was gone. They had played their ace, and it turned out to be a joker. I walked out into the sunlight. I took a deep breath. It was over. The trap was empty. The prey was skinned. Now, all that was left was to bury the carcass. Monday morning at 9 o'clock, courtroom 3B was cold, silent, and smelled faintly of floor wax and desperation. This was not the corporate boardroom where I had trapped Raymond and Ethan the week before. This was family court. Here, contracts meant less than character, and net worth meant less than stability. Raymond and Ethan sat on the left side of the aisle. They looked like men attending a funeral for someone they didn't particularly like. Ethan was wearing a suit that was ill-fitting, likely bought off the rack over the weekend because his custom suits were locked in an apartment he could no longer pay for. Raymond sat beside him, not as a grandfather, but as a handler. He was whispering furiously into Ethan's ear, coaching him until the bailiff barked at them to rise. I sat on the right. Next to me was Elena, my family law attorney. On the table in front of us, there was no laptop, no webcam, and no confusing spreadsheets. There was just a single, thick black binder. It contained 7 years of receipts, 7 years of doctor's appointments, school report cards, ballet recitals, and dental records. It was the paper trail of a mother who had been there for every single breath her daughter had taken. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Vance, took the bench. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that had seen every variation of parental pettiness imaginable. She looked at the emergency petition Ethan had filed. Then she looked at us. We are here on an emergency petition for temporary custody filed by Mr. Price, Judge Vance said, her voice dry, alleging that the mother, Ms. Sanders, is mentally unstable and using the child as a pawn in a business dispute. Mr. Price, you may proceed. Ethan stood up. He didn't have a lawyer. Mr. Sterling had kept his word and walked away when the retainer check bounced. Ethan was representing himself, fueled only by Raymond's arrogance. Your Honor, Ethan began, his voice shaking slightly. Natalie, Ms. Sanders, has become obsessive. She has launched a hostile takeover of my employer, Caldwell Ridge Contracting. She is vindictive. She is trying to bankrupt the family. I am worried that this mania makes her an unsafe environment for our daughter, Maya. He recited the lines Raymond had fed him. They sounded rehearsed and hollow. Judge Vance looked over her glasses. You are worried about her mania? Mr. Price, according to the file, you have not exercised your visitation rights in 4 years. Is that correct? I have been busy building a career. Ethan stammered. To support her. To support her, the judge repeated. Ms. Russo, your witness? Elena stood up. She didn't walk toward the podium. She just leaned back in her chair, looking relaxed. Mr. Price? Elena said. What is the name of Maya's second-grade teacher? Ethan froze. He looked at Raymond. Raymond stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I don't know the specific name, Ethan said. I focus on the big picture. Okay, Elena said. What is the name of her pediatrician? Does she have any allergies? What size shoe does she wear? I object, Raymond shouted from the table. This is irrelevant. You are not a party to this case. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Vance snapped. Sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed, Elena continued, relentless. Mr. Price, you claim you are building a career to support her. But isn't it true that last Friday, your attorney withdrew because your retainer check bounced? And isn't it true that the funds for that check attempted to come from a corporate account belonging to Raymond Caldwell, which had been frozen due to a fraud investigation? That was a misunderstanding, Ethan said, sweating now. No, Elena said, standing up and opening the black binder. It was a pattern, Your Honor. We are submitting into evidence an affidavit signed by Raymond Caldwell just 3 days ago, in this document, intended to explain missing assets in a commercial dispute. Mr. Caldwell admits that signatures on federal transport logs were forged by administrative staff. We are also submitting internal emails provided by Duncan Hale. The former counsel for Caldwell Ridge, a ripple went through the room. Raymond stiffened. He hadn't known Duncan had turned over the emails. These emails, Elena continued, holding up a stack of printed pages, show a clear pattern where Mr. Caldwell instructed Mr. Price to sign legal documents without reading them. They show a conspiracy to hide debt, and most importantly, they show that this custody petition was drafted not by the father, but by the grandfather, specifically as leverage to stop a foreclosure. Elena dropped the papers on the judge's bench. They are not here for the child, Your Honor. Elena concluded. They are here because Ms. Sanders is the creditor who is about to take their company, and they are trying to use the child as a human shield. Judge Vance picked up the affidavit. She read it. Her expression darkened. She looked at Ethan. Mr. Price, you are asking this court to remove a child from a stable home and place her in the custody of a man with no home, no legal counsel, and who is currently under investigation for corporate fraud. I love her, Ethan whispered, the fight draining out of him. You don't even know her teacher's name, Judge Vance said. She slammed the gavel. The petition is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing both Ethan Price and Raymond Caldwell from coming within 500 feet of the child or the mother. Mr. Price, if you want to see your daughter, you can apply for supervised visitation once you have completed a parenting class and cleared your financial legal troubles. Dismissed. Ethan collapsed into his chair. He put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. He had lost the promotion. He had lost the lawsuit. And he had lost the daughter he never bothered to know. But I wasn't looking at Ethan. I was looking at Raymond. Raymond stood up slowly. He looked old. The fire was gone. He walked toward the exit, passing my table. He stopped for a second, looking at me. You think you won, he rasped. You just destroyed the legacy. The name Caldwell means nothing now. The name Caldwell meant nothing the day you used it to steal from your own daughter. I said, calm. I didn't destroy it. Dad, I just corrected the spelling. He walked out. 2 men in dark suits were waiting for him in the hallway. I recognized them. They were from the district attorney's office. They had copies of the affidavit. They had copies of the forged loan documents. The Civil War was over. The criminal war was just beginning. That afternoon, I walked into the headquarters of Caldwell Ridge Contracting. I didn't knock. I used my key card. The new one, issued to the owner. The office was quiet. The employees were huddled in small groups, whispering. They knew the accounts were frozen. They knew the trucks were being seized. They expected the axe to fall. They expected me to liquidate the company, fire everyone, and sell the building to developers. I walked to the center of the bullpen. I stood on a chair. Everyone, listen up, I said. My voice carried clearly across the room. Faces turned toward me, fearful faces, tired faces, people who had mortgages and kids, people who had worked for my father for 20 years and had been lied to just as I had. My name is Natalie Sanders, I said. Harrow Vale Capital has assumed control of this company effective immediately. Raymond Caldwell is no longer the president. Ethan Price is no longer the project manager. There was a gasp, then a silence. I know you are worried about your paychecks, I continued. I know you are worried about your jobs. You have heard that I am here to strip the assets. That is not true. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the foreman, the accountant, the receptionist. I am not my father, I said. I don't build things on debt and lies. I build on facts. And the fact is, this crew is the only part of this company that actually works. The management was the problem. The labor is the asset. I pulled a document from my pocket. I have unfreezed the payroll account, I announced. Everyone gets paid on Friday. We are restructuring the debt. We are selling the luxury vehicles. We are selling the lake house. We are selling the corporate jet that Raymond leased. But we are keeping the excavators. We are finishing the municipal stadium contract, and we are going to do it under a new name. I paused. Sanders Construction, I said. If you want to stay, you have a job. If you want to leave, you get 2 weeks of severance. The choice is yours. For a second, nobody moved. Then, the old foreman, a man named Jim, who had known me since I was a little girl, started to clap. It was a slow clap, but then others joined in. It wasn't a standing ovation of joy. It was the applause of relief. They realized they weren't going to be collateral damage in a rich man's ego war. I stepped down from the chair. I walked into Raymond's office. My office now. It smelled of his cigars. I opened the window to let the cold air in. I took the picture of him shaking hands with the mayor off the wall and dropped it into the trash can. I sat down in the big leather chair. It felt too big, but I knew I would grow into it. I opened the drawer and found a single, unopened letter. It was addressed to me, from 7 years ago. He had never sent it. I didn't open it. I didn't need to know his excuses. I fed it into the shredder and watched the paper turn into confetti. 6 months later, the snow had melted. It was spring in Pittsburgh. I parked my car near the Riverwalk. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the steel bridges that connected the city. I opened the back door and unbuckled Maya. She was 7 years old now, missing a front tooth, and full of questions about everything. "Mommy, look!" she shouted, pointing at the river. "A boat." "I see it, baby," I said. Taking her hand, we walked along the path. The air was fresh, smelling of wet earth and blooming flowers. We walked until we reached the spot where you could see the skyline perfectly. In the distance, I could see the crane working on the stadium. On the side of the crane, freshly painted in bold blue letters, was the name Sanders. Raymond was currently awaiting trial under house arrest at his brother's apartment. The lake house was gone, sold to pay the IRS. The luxury cars were auctioned off. His lawyer, Duncan, had kept his license by testifying against him. Revealing the decade of systemic fraud, Ethan was working at a hardware store in Ohio. paying a court-ordered garnishment on his wages for the child support he had neglected for 7 years. They were all paying their debts. I squeezed Maya's hand. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and trusting. "Mommy, are you happy?" she asked. I looked at the city. I looked at the river that kept flowing. No matter what obstacles were in its way, I looked at the daughter who would never know the shame of being called a mistake. "Yes, Maya," I said, "I am happy." "Grandpa Ray said we were trouble," she said. Repeating something she had overheard once, I stopped walking. I knelt down so I was eye level with her. I fixed her collar and smoothed her hair. "Grandpa Ray was confused about the math," I told her. "What is math?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "Math is about balance," I said. "Dad called me a liability, but in the end, he was the worst bad debt of my life, and I processed it." I stood up and took her hand again. "Come on," I said. "Let's go get ice cream. I'm buying." We walked across the bridge, leaving the shadows behind us, stepping into the light of a debt-free future. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Monica Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.